They said Dresden was the crown jewel of East Germany, a city of culture, of clean streets, of proud people who looked out for one another. But in 2025, something changed. Now, when you walk through the downtown, past the modern plazas and the renovated museums, you'll see a different Dresden. One where tents stretch along the riverbanks, where people sleep wrapped in blankets outside banks that no longer return their calls, where every park bench holds a story no one asked to hear. You don't need a news report to see it. You just need to open your eyes. Behind the tourist brochures and polished facades, another city breathes. Quietly, painfully. They call it a crisis. But for the people living it, this isn't a headline. It's Tuesday. It's survival. It's waking up cold and alone on a sidewalk with no idea where you'll sleep tonight. It's trying to stay clean, stay alive, and stay human in a place that seems to have stopped noticing. The politicians in Berlin say the numbers are being handled, that funding has been reallocated, that programs are expanding. But out here, among the discarded cups and emergency blankets, none of that means anything. Out here, what matters is hot soup, a safe corner, a moment of dignity. And maybe that's why this story matters. Because it's not about policy, it's about people. Like Alma. She used to work as a nurse in Leipzig, a car accident, a painkiller prescription, then fentanyl, then the streets, or Leon, who aged out of foster care and never got a second chance. He sleeps near the tram station and writes poetry in a crumpled notebook. Or the old man who just wants a place to charge his phone so he can hear his granddaughter's voice. They're not criminals. They're not broken. They're just people caught in the crossfire between a collapsing safety net and a city pretending everything's fine. And here's the twist. Dresden didn't collapse overnight. It chipped away. Slow rent hikes, disappearing jobs, one shelter at a time. Then came the drugs. Not the kind people chose, but the kind that were cheaper, stronger, and deadlier. Benzos mixed into street fentanyl. No labels, no warnings, just silence, followed by sirens. So what did the government do? Something unthinkable, at least by old standards. They opened supervised injection centers, gave out clean syringes, started testing street drugs to tell users what was really in them. To critics, it looked like surrender, but to those on the ground, it looked like survival. Because here's the truth. You can't help someone if they're already dead. That's what the staff at Lichtpunkt say. They don't preach, they don't judge. They just keep people alive long enough for a second chance to mean something. And that's where this story begins. In a city where hope flickers like a cigarette in the dark, in the quiet spaces between desperation and dignity, in the faces of those we've forgotten, but who haven't forgotten how to fight. Mornings in the Innenstadt don't start with alarms or coffee. They start with the rustle of tents, the crackle of old radios, the cautious shuffling of feet on cold pavement. Some rise early to avoid the street cleaners. Others wait until the sun brings a little warmth. For many, it's not about starting the day. It's about surviving another one. At the bus terminal, Alma wipes dew off her jacket and folds the thin blanket she shares with two others. She's been sleeping near the bike racks for weeks. Her left wrist still bears the faded ID band from the last time she was hospitalized. She says she's clean now, at least today, but her eyes flicker with the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than sleep. A few blocks away, Leon sips lukewarm tea from a plastic thermos handed out by volunteers. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, it's poetry. Rhymes about broken elevators and lost boys. He says he used to be angry at the world. Now, he's just numb. Between the two of them and dozens like them, there's a kind of rhythm on these streets, a quiet choreography of survival. Everyone knows which cafes will let you use the restroom without buying something, which libraries turn a blind eye to naps, which grocery stores throw out food at closing time. The sidewalks here are more than stone. They're sleeping quarters, dining areas, and makeshift hospitals. The alleys become pharmacies when someone shares a strip of ibuprofen. The underpasses are confessionals where stories unfold that no one else will hear. But make no mistake, this isn't laziness or choice. It's what happens when a safety net unravels thread by thread. Rent in Dresden has climbed faster than wages for years. A one-bedroom now averages over $200 a month. Minimum wage? Not even close. A single missed paycheck, a sudden illness, one wrong moment, and everything can slip away. You see it in the faces of people who still wear office shoes, in the way they keep their hair tidy even when they haven't showered in days. These aren't the people society warned you about. They're the people who bagged your groceries, cleaned your hotel rooms, served your coffee. And still, in all of this, something remarkable persists. Kindness. Volunteers like Petra, a retired teacher, make rounds each morning with a cart of sandwiches and wet wipes. It's not much, she says, but it's something. There's an unspoken code out here. You help when you can. You share what little you've got. Alma once gave up her only gloves to a kid trembling in the cold. Leon once walked an hour just to return a woman's lost scarf. These acts don't go viral, but they matter. Deeply. Because the streets of Dresden are not just a place of crisis. They are a place of quiet resistance, of holding on to dignity when the world looks away. And as the city rushes past, commuters glued to their phones, students late to class, business people lost in numbers, few notice the small community beneath their feet. But it's there, living, enduring, and waiting maybe for someone to finally see them. What would you do if your city started changing like this? Would you walk past? Or would you stop and listen? For some, the answer came in the form of a question no one expected. What if we stopped punishing people for being addicted and started helping them survive it? That's when Lichtpunkt opened its doors. It doesn't look like much from the outside. Just a low building near the tram line, tucked between a grocery outlet and a shuttered bookstore. But inside, it's a different world. Clean rooms, medical staff, test kits, counselors who ask your name before your history, and drawers full of medical-grade alternatives to the poison flooding the streets. This is where the controversial pilot program began, Dresden's version of Safe Supply. Under new state guidelines in Saxony, small amounts of hard drugs were decriminalized. Not legalized, but decriminalized. It meant that if someone like Alma had a dose of heroin on her, she wouldn't be arrested. Instead, she'd be referred to care, offered clean supplies, given a seat, a test, a second chance. To some, it sounded like madness. Opponents called it surrender, said it was enabling, that it turned the government into a dealer. But the staff at Lichtpunkt, they didn't flinch. Because they'd seen the alternative. Bodies found in alleys, young people overdosing alone, parents identifying their children at morgues. They knew that dead addicts don't recover. So they tested the street drugs, found benzos mixed into fentanyl, traces of cleaning chemicals, substances no human should ever inject. They warned users, they labeled samples, they tracked overdoses. And something unexpected happened. The death toll dropped. Not to zero, not yet, but enough to matter. Even more surprising, dealers started paying attention. The testing center created a ripple effect. Users asked for purer cuts. Bad batches got flagged on street corners. The underground began to police itself in a way the law never could. Meanwhile, Alma started coming to Lichtpunkt every Tuesday. Not to get high, but to stay safe, to ask questions, to feel human again. She told a nurse once, "It's the only place that calls me by my name." Leon, too. He wouldn't inject inside, still too proud. But he sat in the hallway, reading aloud from his notebook to anyone who'd listen. One of the volunteers started archiving his poems. Another offered to help publish a zine. This wasn't utopia. No one was pretending it was. But it was a start, a crack of light in the cement. And yet, outside those walls, the debate raged on. News anchors debated policy, politicians performed outrage, but none of them had seen what Petra had. A young woman gently placing her used needle in the sharps bin, then asking, quietly, if there was a way out of this life. Compassion doesn't cure addiction, Petra once said, but it keeps people alive long enough to try. That's the question hanging over Dresden now. Is keeping someone alive an act of mercy, or just prolonging the pain? And deeper still, when did helping someone survive become so controversial? If someone you loved were lost like this, would you want them punished or protected? Just a few streets away from Lichtpunkt, the mood is different. In the leafy district of Johannstadt, where flower boxes line windows and children play in clean courtyards, the whispers are growing louder. They're moving in. There was a tent by the bakery this morning. I saw someone shooting up near the tram stop. The words slip between neighbors like drafts under an old door. And with them comes something more dangerous than frustration: fear. You see, for many residents, this crisis didn't feel real until it showed up on their block. It was always somewhere else, on TV, in the tabloids, in places they could avoid. But now? Now the shelters are full. The warming centers are overrun. The encampments are spreading. Sidewalks that once held tourists now hold shopping carts filled with torn blankets and empty bottles. Parents walk their kids to school a little faster. Store owners lock their doors before dusk. And online forums buzz with anxious debates about safety, property values, and whose responsibility all this really is. In some corners, empathy still flickers. People organize coat drives, host neighborhood meetings, but in others, the walls are going up. There's talk of curfews, petitions to relocate shelters, complaints about outreach workers giving out supplies too close to the shopping district. "We're not heartless," one cafe owner says, "but this isn't what we signed up for." And maybe that's the quiet truth behind it all. No one thinks it will ever be them. Until it is. Until the layoff hits. Or the rent doubles. Or a medical bill arrives that insurance won't cover. And suddenly, the person sleeping in the park isn't a stranger. It's your cousin, your old roommate, your father's friend from church. That's the part no one wants to admit. That the line between stability and the sidewalk is terrifyingly thin. In fact, a 2025 regional report found that nearly 41% of people experiencing homelessness in Dresden had full-time jobs in the last 2 years. Many still work at warehouses, kitchens, even nursing homes. They just can't afford to live near where they work. It's not about laziness. It's about math. When a studio apartment costs more than your monthly take-home, where are you supposed to go? So people improvise. They sleep in cars, in stairwells, on benches beneath the digital billboards that flash ads for luxury condos. And maybe what hurts the most is that the city keeps pretending it's just a blip. That if we move the tents, the problem moves too. But the problem doesn't move. It festers. It waits. Still, in the middle of this tension, there are moments. like a teenager in Dresden who leaves fresh socks in a box marked "for anyone cold," or a retired couple in Südvorstadt who open their garage every Thursday to serve tea and bread to anyone who shows up. No questions asked. These aren't solutions. But there's something. A reminder that the soul of a city isn't measured by how it treats its tourists, but by how it treats the people it's failed. And right now, Dresden is standing at a crossroads. Will it double down on fear and distance? Or will it find a way to lean in, to reach across the divide and remember that all of it, is human? By mid-2025, Dresden's City Council unveiled a new plan, or rather, a set of numbers. 18.7 million allocated to transitional housing, 4 million toward expanding mental health response teams, 1.2 million set aside for additional outreach workers and mobile clinics. The press conference was full of optimism. "We are addressing the roots," the mayor said, "not just the symptoms." But out on the streets, people weren't celebrating. Because numbers don't shelter you from the rain. Budgets don't bandage infected wounds. And policy memos don't sit beside you when you're shaking from withdrawal. Alma didn't even hear about the announcement until 3 days later, when a young volunteer mentioned it while handing her a sandwich. She blinked. "Do they think that changes anything for me this week?" Leon wrote a poem about it. He called it "Promises on Paper." There's something about that phrase that sticks. Because in crisis, promises lose their weight unless they show up in food, shelter, and warmth. That's not to say nothing has changed. Some of the new shelters have opened, converted gymnasiums mostly, lined with cots and buzzing fluorescent lights. Better than nothing, yes, but a far cry from home. The mobile clinics have helped too. People can now get basic wound care without trekking across the city. And a new team of trauma-informed social workers are walking the downtown core daily, asking gentle questions instead of barking orders. Still, it's all playing catch-up. Because the truth is, the crisis outpaced the system years ago. And fixing it now isn't like flipping a switch, it's like turning around a cargo ship in a bathtub. And while the government talks data, the streets keep talking reality. Reality is Petra sitting with a young woman named Katya, who's just lost her place in the women's shelter because she missed curfew by 14 minutes. Her reason? She was helping an old man cross the road. Reality is Uwe, a former mechanic who still wears his workshop overalls, sleeping behind a supermarket dumpster because the shelter won't take his dog. Reality is the elderly woman who lines up for tea every morning, not because she's homeless, but because her pension doesn't stretch far enough to pay for both electricity and groceries. These aren't edge cases. They're the new normal. And beneath all the headlines and hashtags lies a deeper truth. You can't spreadsheet your way out of human suffering. The most effective program Dresden has seen this year wasn't a building or a budget. It was a group of volunteers who showed up every evening to distribute hot stew and listen. No forms, no ID, no judgment. Just presence. Because sometimes the first step out of despair isn't treatment. It's being seen. And that's what this city still struggles with. Not just how to fix what's broken, but how to recognize who's been forgotten. So when you hear the numbers, pause. Ask yourself, how many promises on paper does it take to build a bed, a meal, a moment of peace? And more importantly, who's still waiting while we figure it out? The rain doesn't stop in Dresden. It drizzles, then pours, then taps gently again, like it's trying to wash something away. On the corner of Loeb Tower and Konneritz Street, a man named Andreas sits under a tarp that used to be a billboard. His jeans are soaked. His hands tremble, not from the cold, but from the waiting. Andreas has been sober for 11 days. That may not sound like a miracle to most people. But out here, it's the kind of thing that takes everything. Discipline, luck, and something even rarer, support. What changed for him? A warm jacket from a stranger, a conversation that didn't begin with, "You need to leave," and a moment, a single moment, where someone asked, "Do you want help, or do you just want someone to sit with you right now?" That moment came from a woman named Elsie. She's not a social worker, not a city employee. She's a former addict who now walks the city with a backpack full of water bottles, tissues, and patience. Elsie breaks all the rules. She lets people hug her. She gives out her personal number. She stays longer than she's supposed to. And maybe that's what makes her so effective. Because what the system often forgets is that healing isn't linear. People don't move from step 1 to step 2 like it's an assembly line. Sometimes step 1 is surviving the night. Step 2 is brushing your teeth in the library bathroom. And step 3, it might take years. But still, the steps matter. Andreas says the first time someone called him by name in months was when Elsie returned to check on him. "You're still here," she said. He cried for the first time in over a decade. Across the river, at a pop-up outreach center, a small group gathers each Wednesday night. They don't wear uniforms. They bring candles. Not for prayer, for light. They sit in silence with people detoxing on concrete floors. They wipe sweat from brows, hold hands, whisper stories of hope into ears, buzzing with panic. They call themselves Lichttanker, light anchor. No funding, no banners, just people showing up. And in those quiet, trembling moments, something shifts. Because when someone sits with you through the worst, it plants a seed of dignity, of worth, of the belief that maybe, just maybe, you deserve another chance. But not everyone sees it that way. Outside City Hall last week, a protest broke out. Residents waving signs, "Clean up our streets. No more handouts for junkies. We pay, they play." It's anger. It's fear. It's the voice of a middle class that feels ignored, struggling under rent hikes, childcare costs, and long hospital waits. They see the same cracks and worry they'll fall through next. The danger isn't their frustration. It's where that frustration gets pointed. Because when systems fail, blame doesn't rise. It trickles down. And in Dresden, that means pointing at people like Andreas. People who are already carrying everything they own, and now must carry the weight of public resentment too. That's why stories like this matter. Because they remind us what gets lost in the noise: humanity. So ask yourself, who's sitting in the rain right now, just waiting for someone to say their name? By early fall, something unexpected happened. A group of students from the Dresden Academy of Fine Arts launched a project called Second Glance. They took portraits of people living on the streets, black and white, raw, unfiltered, and displayed them in the windows of local shops. Grocery stores, pharmacies, bookstores, places where people passed by every day. But next to each photo, they included a first name, a quote, and one fact no one would expect. Katja, 29, used to be a dental assistant, wants to learn photography. Uwe, 63, loves jazz, lost his apartment after his wife passed. Leon, 24, writes poetry about the stars, never stopped dreaming. At first, some business owners pushed back. "It'll scare customers," they said. But then something shifted. People stopped. They read. Some even cried. And for the first time, the invisible started to become visible. One cafe owner, who originally opposed the project, ended up hiring Alma part-time to clean tables. He said he didn't realize she was the same woman sleeping outside his building for weeks. She always looked people in the eye, he said. That stuck with me. It wasn't a tidal wave of change, but it was a ripple, and it spread. Churches started leaving baskets of hygiene kits near entrances. Teenagers handed out socks and granola bars after school. A group of retired engineers offered free bike repairs to anyone, no questions asked. Then came the real twist. Lichtpunkt announced a pilot transition program for 5 individuals. A chance to move into shared housing, paired with counseling, job training, and medical care. Alma was one of the first invited. She hesitated, not because she didn't want help, but because accepting it meant believing she was worth it, that she could be something more than a shadow on a sidewalk. She stood outside the building for nearly an hour, watching people come and go, listening to the sounds of normal life echo through open windows. Then she stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time in 2 years, she slept in a bed with clean sheets and a lock on the door. Across the city, Leon handed Petra a small notebook. It was filled, every page scrawled with poems, dreams, names, memories. He smiled for the first time in weeks and said, "Maybe someone will read them someday." And in a moment that broke every rule, Petra hugged him. Not because she was supposed to, but because sometimes healing starts with breaking the rules written by fear and following the ones written by love. These small defiant acts of dignity, of humanity, of belief are rewriting Dresden's story, not from the top down, but from the sidewalks up. So maybe the real change doesn't come in legislation or press releases. Maybe it starts with something simpler, a photo in a window, a name on a cup, a voice saying, "I see you, you matter." Winter came early that year. The frost settled over Dresden like a warning. Steam curled from manholes. Breath hung heavy in the air. And across the city, people rushed into warm buildings without noticing the ones who couldn't. But something was different. There were fewer tents on the sidewalks. Not because the crisis was over, but because more doors had quietly opened. Lichtpunkt expanded. The transition housing pilot became permanent. More than 24 people found beds, showers, and places to simply exhale. Elsie still made her rounds, now with 2 volunteers by her side. Andreas was on day 93 of sobriety. He had an appointment with a job counselor next week. Alma had a nameplate on her door. It wasn't fancy, just a laminated card taped to wood, but it was hers. Leon's poems? They were published. A local newspaper ran 3 of them, alongside a photo of him smiling, really smiling for the first time in print. But not everyone was saved. Not every story had a tidy arc. Some people relapsed. Some disappeared. Some didn't make it through the cold. And that's part of the truth, too. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a city. A real, messy, complicated city full of people trying, failing, trying again. It's a place where hope doesn't show up in speeches, but in thermoses passed hand to hand, in eyes that meet instead of avoid, in simple acts that say, "I see you." Because in the end, the question isn't whether we can end homelessness or addiction with one program or one vote. The real question is, what kind of people are we when it happens? Do we walk faster, or do we stop, even for a moment, to say someone's name? If this story moved you, don't just scroll past. Think of the Almas, the Leons, the Andreases in your own city. Leave a thought. Share a memory. Start a conversation. Because change doesn't start with policy. It starts with presence. And maybe, just maybe, that presence can become a kind of shelter too.